Welcome to an Inside the Red Raiders special report. We're talking what else? Conference realignment as the big time just bombshell of UCLA and USC departing for the Big Ten was dropped earlier this week. I was out of town, which I'm kind of grateful for, instead of just like a early reaction or trying to like just scramble for any bits or scraps of information. Just kind of sit back and think about it and really internalize, what does this all mean? What are the possible repercussions for Texas Tech and the Big 12 and just all that. So I want to preface this by saying I'm not saying I have this sources tell me this is what's going to happen. I think there are a couple things you could say are probably going to happen. I do believe some people have some really good sources in terms of what they're being told, but with conference realignment, it's very much like a coaching change or a coaching search, in that things change very rapidly. You could be right about what you're saying, or your source could be telling you something and it's a good source, and it not be correct, later, even later in that day. So this is what we'll just kind of talk about, what we know, what I believe would be best for Texas Tech, and what I believe the college football landscape will look like in the future. But who really knows? I mean, we're all just kind of looking at each other like, wow, this is crazy. This is what I believed, for example, Texas Tech or the Big 12 should do. This is what I believe the college football landscape is going to look like. And, but anything could happen. What's been shown to us in the last, let's just say 3, 4, 5 years, is anything is possible with college sports and college football, and it's the Wild West right now. So first off, just with USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten, now I was surprised just that the information happened, just because there wasn't like a big leak. It was just like, bam, this is what's happening. But I'm not shocked that this is happening. I've thought since really for a while, and then with OU and Texas leaving for the SEC, the writing was on the wall that basically TV networks, you could say ESPN and the powers that be, have been angling for some time to create power conferences, or a new level of college football that centers around power conferences, namely the SEC and the Big Ten. So that's what they're doing, is kind of gathering strength and trying to create this power level, or to break away from the NCAA and forge their own college football type league. So, it's nerve-wracking, and I'll get to like how it affects the Big 12 and Texas Tech in a minute, in terms of if you're a fan of someone not in those two conferences, what's going to happen. It's also exciting, to see. Change is, with the newness of it, it's exciting. But, the times they are changing with college football. What my opinion on it is, I don't know. Is it good or bad for like us as fans, just in general of the sport? I feel like a lot of the decisions that have been made over the last 10 to 20 years, really, like none of them have been with us, like the fans, in mind, people who enjoy the sport. It's more just about, it's about money, just like how almost everything when it becomes big business, what it becomes. So it's, big cash grab. It's for angling for new TV contracts. And there's new players in there too. With streaming services getting into the mix with sports, will Amazon, will Apple, who all is going to really jump in there? Will Netflix ever do that? Just what is the TV or streaming market going to look like? And how is that going to change the sport? It will be interesting. ESPN is the big dog with Disney, of course, wanting to control, the future of college football. And it makes sense for them in terms of business-wise. Again, is it good for us fans? I don't know. We'll have to see. I think it's my first reaction is no, it's not good. But maybe it will be. Well, I think to say for sure, is hubris. We'll just have to see how things play out, and when the dust settles, if it ever settles, if things ever stop changing. And another talking point I wanted to mention was power conferences in itself. Like, what will they be? Like, so we know the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be two of the big dogs, but what happens to the ACC? And they have this long TV contract and the grant of rights that goes for, what, I think it's to 2036. I don't know what all the outs are and the clauses are to where, like I said, Clemson or Florida State or Miami can get out of it. And then you got to consider probably Duke and North Carolina in basketball. Though still, I don't know how they are revenue-wise. I don't think they compete with some of the big football programs, even in the ACC, like a Clemson. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the ACC and if they can find a way out of it and where they end up. How does UCLA and USC change things for the Pac-12? I mean, the Big 12 was kind of looked at like it was imploding, but then they added, BYU and Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston. And that kind of leads me to, all right, what does the Big 12 do? What does Texas Tech need to do? Does Texas Tech need to try and find a way? I don't think they can find a way in the SEC. I don't think Texas or A&M wants them. I don't think the SEC necessarily wants Tech just because the UT and A&M already gives them a pretty good foothold in the major markets in Texas. So that's not to belittle what Tech offers. It's a lot. It's a huge fan base. We're talking about, over 1 million fans at least, and pretty good viewership despite not great results on the gridiron. And I think Joey McGuire, his recruiting success, his reputation points to Texas Tech, being relevant in the future and, producing some good teams. So there's a lot going on for Texas Tech. Very good basketball squad. I don't think the other sports really play into this. Maybe even basketball doesn't, although I think it does a little. Basketball does a little when you're on this scale, top 20 program at this point with Red Raider basketball. So it's definitely interesting in terms of conference realignment. For me, and a lot of people are saying this, they think the Big 12 should expand. They should, poach schools where they can from the Pac-12 and maybe the ACC. And again, that gets murky with all their TV, their long TV contract, terrible TV contract, to be honest. It seems to be, a lot of people are saying, I know Tim Fitzgerald, my associate over at the Kansas State 24/7 sports site, gopowercat.com, has said it looks like it's almost inevitable that the Arizona schools, Arizona State, are going to join the Big 12. That would be interesting. There's a lot of talk about Colorado returning, Utah joining, which would make that interesting with Utah and BYU. I think personally, I'm for those 4 schools joining. I'm for Texas Tech, as long as at this point I want them to add, to go ahead and poach schools from Power 5 conferences. I do think they need to expand or face the consequences. Now, whether that's the right philosophy or not moving forward, time will tell. But it seems to be that if you don't expand in one of these mega conferences, you will get left behind. Even if Texas Tech isn't in that main level, which would be bad, that would hinder the program, don't get me wrong. It still seems like to be viable, to just exist as a conference, the Big 12, they need to expand and get bigger while the getting's good, which is right now. So those 4 teams sound good. I think Notre Dame, it appears, which makes sense, being an independent. It's probably time to put up or shut up. They need to. They'll probably end up joining the Big Ten, one would think, and that'll be interesting. And then I think some dominoes will fall from that. Where does Stanford, Oregon, Washington end up? Those are some pretty big programs. So it is interesting. Now that dominoes are actually falling, I find it interesting, just because there's so much that we don't know, so much that, like I said, so many dominoes need to fall before we see where everyone stands. And again, I'm hesitant to believe anyone saying this is definitely going to happen, because you're getting conflicting reports from credible journalists with real sources. So, and it doesn't mean that one of them is definitely wrong. It's just that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of up in the air, and it's interesting times. So, I do believe Texas Tech is situated better than it was, say, 10 years ago. because of the whole athletic department is doing good. The football program seems to be on the upswing. I really like the coaching staff, Joey McGuire. I really like actually the NIL. Some of the stuff for the NILs I believe has helped Texas Tech. I believe they have their act together. There's been a heavy investment in the program. The whole athletic program in general. Cody Campbell, Dusty Wallenbull are two names, obvious names, but there's been more than just that. So, I think the future's bright for Texas Tech, but they need to be careful. I don't think it's a time to be cautious. I think it's a time to be aggressive. And I am glad that there is new leadership with the Big 12 and leadership that historically has been aggressive. So it'll be a more interesting Big 12 Media Day coming up in a couple weeks than it has been in the past. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out. But interesting times. I'm sure I'll have many more reports on conference realignment and what it means for Texas Tech and the Big 12. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, and until next time.